Our Gatorade game leaders looking back at a year of firsts for Indiana football in 2024. First ever 10-win season, first trip to the college football playoff under first-year head coach Curt Cignetti, who was ultimately named the 2024 National Coach of the Year. And while we can enjoy looking back, Coach Sig always focused on looking forward.
Well, you got to start over, right? In every team, because in college sports, you got new guys. You got a few more new guys now because of the portal, but you got to start over every year. And you got to have a blueprint, you got to have a plan, you got to have a process, you got to have high standards, expectations, accountability, right people in your organization, down in the locker room. Then you got to develop them. What you're looking for is a standard of performance that's like that. Day in, day out, the way you approach a meeting, the way you practice, the way you play, right? And you avoid this. Right? You're not affected by success. You don't get big-headed. How do you back it up? You guys ask that question. All we're doing is trying to get as good as we can get today and string together days.
All true, but the fact is that you surprised everybody except maybe you and the players that came with you.
Correct.
From your season last year. So at what point were you able to sit back and say, all right, fellas, for a couple of days at least, let's enjoy what you accomplished, because it was pretty amazing?
Probably we didn't at all during the season, to be honest with you. I mean, I felt in my heart like we had flipped the roster last December when we brought the first batch of transfers in, 22 of them, and we had the right guys stay. And I felt like, okay, we're going to be okay here. What I really liked the most about last season was how consistently we played from the beginning to the end, for the most part, up until about the first half of Michigan. You know, I was a little disappointed in the way we finished, to be quite honest with you. You know, we got off to a decent start against Ohio State, had a lead midway through the second quarter, drop a punt snap, and, you know, kind of imploded there a little bit. And we didn't play as well as I expected us to against Notre Dame. So to me, the silver lining of that is you came out of there with a kind of a sour, bitter taste in your mouth heading into this season, which isn't a bad thing in terms of motivation, being, you know, for this next journey. But I give our coaches and our players a lot of credit for the way they approach the season and everything they accomplished.
Curt, you had one of, if not the most efficient offenses in the country a year ago. Obviously, you don't get to bring the quarterback back who was leading that offense, but you're bringing a guy who has shown that he can play at the highest level. He even has some of his own blood in the quarterback room with him in case he gets uncomfortable.
I like the way he ended spring ball. You know, some good moments and bad the first half of spring, but I thought his last 4 or 5 practices were pretty good. Now, you know, he's got some things he's got to work on yet, but he's got a lot of ability. He's got good size, good mobility, he's got a strong arm, quick release, he's really smart. And it's our job to help take him to another level.
I've been covering offenses that you've been a part of since your time in the early 2000s at NC State, and all of these offenses have been really good. I'm curious, for you, is there kind of a golden thread that runs through an offense, regardless of what the personnel is, whether the quarterback's a star, whether the running back's a star, whether you have a first-team wide receiver? Is there one constant with all these offenses that are the best of those offenses that you've coached?
Well, it sure helps if you have a guy, quarterback, that can function at a high level. There's no doubt. I mean, Phillip Rivers for 4 years at NC State, you ought to play pretty good. He wasn't bad. Yeah, you ought to play pretty good offense. You know, you got to have balance. You got to be able to run it, you got to throw it, and you got to build around what you got, right? And I think you always have to stay on the cutting edge in terms of strategy and schematics, because, you know, football does change. All sports change in terms of how people attack people or defend people. And you want to stay on top of the trends, but don't get too far out there. You got to do things you know, that you understand, that you can teach, and make it simple, and but yet look kind of complicated and multiple on tape. And you've got to have good players that are well coached.
You have game changers, impact players, I would argue, at all 3 levels coming back. What does that do for a defense?
Well, they're good players that have played a lot of football. You look at Pons, and basically he can take away half the field. Aiden Fisher is a great communicator. He's always going to get us lined up correctly. He's instinctive. He makes a lot of tackles. You can count on him. You can trust him always. And Kamara, you know, I think led the country in quarterback pressures or something along those lines. And, you know, he can be a problem. You know, Farrell, I think, is a really good football player. That if he keeps developing, you know, everybody's going to know his name. You know, I think the pieces are there. And I think, for the most part, the new faces on both sides of the ball kind of followed that same path all the transfers do. You know, they were a lot better the last half of spring, and now they got to have a great summer, and they'll be a lot better in fall camp.
Purdue sucks. But so does Michigan and Ohio State. Go OU.
Curt, you're a guy who speaks his mind. You say what is on your mind. Is there a method to that madness? Is there a formula behind it when you are making, whether it's a comment or a prediction that ends up becoming social media fire? Is there a thought process behind that, or are you just speaking what's in the very front of your cranium at that moment?
Well, I don't know. Well, you know, my dad always said what was on his mind, but you know, he probably wasn't quite out there a little bit as much as I am. Sometimes I'll just say something just because I know it'll create some attention. And quite frankly, when I took this job, you know, I was on campus about an hour, and I could just sense the doom, gloom, despair, and the neglect everywhere. And I just come from a place that won 5 straight championships, and I wasn't going to have it. So it was two worlds colliding. And I had to find out if the fan base was dead or just on life support. So, you know, I had to kind of, you know, prod the a little bit, and you know, I said a few things, and I was out there. There's no doubt about it. I was out on a limb, but thank God those players backed me up and those coaches.
Did you ever have a moment where you wondered, what did I just do there?
Every once in a while, yeah. But I think the guys kind of fed off it a little bit too, to be honest with you. And I think they had a chip on their shoulder. We all did, and we had something to prove. And you know what? We've found enough material out there this year to let that chip grow a little bit. We got something to prove again.
Without question, one of the most enjoyable of the 30 interviews I conducted during the Big Ten Summit in late May. Breaking news, the College Football Hall of Fame has announced players and coaches on its 2026 ballot. 79 players representing 69 different schools, including these players from Big Ten schools, highlighted Kajana Carter of Penn State. How about James Laurinaitis and Antoine Randall, 2 outstanding players who spent time here in our studio, and Ndamukong Suh on that list as well. As always, we appreciate you spending some time with us here on Big Ten Today. I'm Rick Pizzo. Hope your week is off to a terrific start.